Hey everyone, do we have trouble with tribbles? I mean tariffs? You're watching Techstrong Gang. Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong Gang. Happy Wednesday to you. I'm Alan Schimmel, and I'm coming to you today from out in Napa Valley at the JFrog Swamp Up event, where we're talking about DevOps, a lot of DevOps, software supply chain, and more. We're going to get into that. But we've got a great show lined up today. We've got a great panel to talk about it with you all. Let me introduce you to our panel today. We've got our friend Chris Blask, Garima Bapal, Jeff Rich, John Willis, and of course, John Swartz, who's out here in Napa with me. Of course, he would be. He is our Silicon Valley person. Panel, welcome. Thanks for joining us here on Techstrong Gang. So we're going to lead things off today, riffing off an article that John has up regarding tariffs. I mean, to say the least, it seems like our tariff policy is unstable, geared towards, whoever bends the knee, on again, off again. But it's hard to figure out what the heck's going on. John?
Yeah. I wish I could explain it to you as well, because what I'm doing is like a timeline, and the timeline shows a consistent thread of threats from the Trump administration, especially after he has his closed door meetings with the tech executives. I think our excellent producer Taylor put it really well. He goes, "Haven't we talked about this before?" And it's like, yes, this is like deja vu all over again. I'll just give you a quick summary of what just happened in the last couple of months, and I'll make it really quick. So Friday, we have Trump threatened trade actions, including more tariffs after the EU fined Google $3.5 billion over its ad exchange business. The day before that, the Trump administration threatened to slap tariffs on semiconductor imports from companies not shifting production to the U.S., which is a major theme of this America First strategy. Last month, Trump vowed in a social media post to levy substantial tariffs on countries that regulate or tax U.S. tech companies. Specifically, he's talking about Europe, but he's also talking about Asia. And then July, he proposed a ban, which was, I think, crazy, on U.S. tech companies that are outsourcing jobs to India. And I think my takeaway, and I will pass this on to our esteemed gang, is that, in a sense, he's made tariffs a key tenet of his foreign economic policy to exert pressure, not just on people overseas, but companies that are here, and in a sense, in a way to kind of strong arm or force them into building data centers or investing money in manufacturing here. Now, we'll see how that goes, but I'm very dubious of it, because I think what's happening is these tech executives are whispering to him all these promises and throwing out all these numbers that they have absolutely no intention of ever following through on. They're just trying to appease him in the short term. So this is what we have: is you have like basically favoritism based on threats and based on his agenda to bring manufacturing back. It's a crazy world, and it's going to keep changing day by day.
Okay, anybody want to jump in here?
I'm sorry, I had to editorialize a bit, because I find this stuff head spinning. It's completely inconsistent, but I see what the ultimate goal is basically, like for everything else he does, it's intimidation and frustration and confusion.
I mean, I think it's just I don't have much to say about this. I'm very interested in the chips, like TSMC and what where they wind up in the big picture versus China. But to watch Tim Cook grovel to Trump, which I know Trump is antithetical to everything he believes in, But it makes me think, John, what you're saying is they're just playing this game with him.
Yeah.
Right, they're saying,
I think you're
right. You got it. No worries, So anyway,
I'm glad you mentioned Tim Cook, and I'll stop talking. But John, you're right, totally right about Tim Cook. I mean, in a sense, I think he knows how to play Trump pretty well. But at the same time, to me, it's rather sad empathetic for what Apple stands for or used to stand for versus what they are now?
Well, yeah. So we're logical, tactical people by definition. That's this is actually tech strong. We think through things and things make sense regardless of what they are, and they can sometimes make stupid sense, but they make sense, right? And as you folks know, we do a lot of semantic breakdowns. We look at the logic of words and systems and so forth, and see how because you can logically describe what's going on. In this case, is a perfect example. And the Hyundai rate is a great one. And we did a Casco breakdown on that one. And if you just logically walk through it, the story that makes sense in English words is that the investment, the billions of dollars invested in the states and in Georgia, that wasn't important, and the immigration part wasn't important either. So what is important? The only thing left is concentrating authority, right? To demonstrate specifically, have a spectacle where you say, if you thought doing this would work, and if you thought doing this would work, you're wrong. There's only one thing that can work. And that's a well-worn story, that has played out in history in the world over and over and over again. So for us to stand here and say it doesn't make sense and it's crazy is a good emotional, it's an honest reaction. But like any, I've dealt with threat actors of all sorts all my life, including all of them, terrorists and bad rogue states and so forth. And you always break it down, and there is a logic there, and it's important to understand what it is. So I think this is a relatively simple semantic puzzle, and we just walk through it, and you can see what the reasons are, and you can predict and adjust and combat, if you will, those structures once you understand them.
Chris, I got to go with you real briefly, because a lot of our members at IDSA are outside of the U.S. And I have conversations with them, and they ask me questions like, "How can you justify what's going on?" Like, I'm not the person to ask, first of all. But to me, simply put, tariffs are cudgel. And Chris, what you said, the objective is going to be there. It may or may not be actually related to trade, but there is a cudgel available and it's used.
I got a few thoughts on this. So, Chris, to your point about historical, use of monarchs and despots, there's been a few documents in the history of humanity to deal with this kind of rubbish. Hammurabi's rule of law going back a couple thousand years beyond, before Christ, the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, little things that define the relationship between a ruler or a government and its citizens. And when those kinds of things get trampled, you wind up with things like Nazi Germany, Mussolini's Italy, Franco's Spain, Stalin's Soviet Union. And I'm not here trying to, doomsay all of this, because I do think we're coming to a point where the people in this country, or at least a majority of the people, a clear majority, are saying, this is just nonsense. There are the 35%, whatever. I don't know what kind of drugs they're on, but they're going to go along and believe, and maybe it's because they have their own views on it. But the fact of the matter is, look, we have a case before the Supreme Court right now, or it's going before the Supreme Court, where an appellate division, in a very well-reasoned decision, said these tariffs are wrong. They're illegal. He has no power to do that without it's Congress. So, Jeff, to your point about a cudgel, I posted a couple weeks ago on my Facebook feed, actually, because I don't try to do politics stuff on LinkedIn, a video of Ronald Reagan, that libtard Ronald Reagan, right? Where he talked about why tariffs don't work. Why that at first it may seem to work because you're getting the money, but what you're doing is you're not cudgeling, you're coddling the companies that you are protecting, and make them. It's like being an overprotective parent, and you make an emotionally damaged child. You make a non-competitive company because they can't compete on the world stage without your protective tariffs. And sometimes that's okay to do for short term if you're looking to build your industry or whatever, but using it as the weapon that he's using it here is is not healthy. It's not even healthy for the companies you're purporting to protect. That's the bottom.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that. It made me think about, I mean, it's just the Intel and the relationship between the government and Intel now. Like, I think we're going to see other types of those deals. I'm not sure who with, but this kind of overprotective, kind of almost symbiotic relationship between the government and tech company, which is completely anathema. It's you're going to see more of it.
And I want to mention one other thing. The nonsense story about, well, it's the foreign companies that are paying these tariffs. It's not the American people. I have a good friend of mine, Jeff, you probably remember Stephen Northcutt.
Of
Stephen,
course I do. Yeah.
And Stephen's also not one to be a bleeding heart liberal, right? Stephen's pretty conservative. Stephen's one of the founders of SANS. He's retired now. He put a post up just today, I saw it, that him and his wife ordered some goods. I think they were from England or somewhere, some kind of China, ceramics. And that the UPS people called him and said, well, look, in order for us, we've got your goods here, but in order for us to deliver them, the tariffs on these, the goods were about $300. The tariffs on these are $61. So we need you to pay the $61 now before we'll deliver them. Well, that's not a tax on the manufacturer or the company sending it. That's a tax on you, right? That's $61 added to the cost here. Well,
Alan, I want to just tell you a quick story, which is just, and no defense here, but I sent a book to Mark Burgess, my recent book, right? Because I wanted to ship it really fast because he wrote the forward for it, right? And so I sent it like 2 days to where he lives in not Norway now, I'm forgetting where it is, but what foreign country. So it got stuck in tax whatever evaluation, and turns out he had to pay like $60 for a free book that I sent. Anyway, so it's sort of like again, no defense, but just it made me think of that story, which like a book.
Well, what happens is you get reciprocal tariffs.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah.
And that's what Ronald Reagan said in that video. So he mentioned 3 or 4 things. One was, companies become non-competitive. The second thing was that you get reciprocal tariffs, and what happens is basic global trade breaks down. And Ronald Reagan, like the Republican Party most of us grew up with, was a big believer in free trade and globalism, and it's a big markets out there. And so, this is what happens as a result of this. The other thing, John Swartz, you brought it up, and I just want to emphasize that, is the uncertainty of all of this. Today it's on, tomorrow it's off. Kiss my ass today and it's okay. Do something that upsets me and it's not okay. This sort of chaos that we're all being subjected to is ultimately that even if he was doing something right, it's wrong, right? The chaos, business doesn't thrive in chaos.
But that is, of course, the point, right? And there's a song from a one-man play about Billy Bishop, a World War I ace, that I always think about in conflict. And it's after he had become famous, gone back to England, getting trotted around, getting full of himself, and someone older and wiser gave him some advice. And it goes like this. It says, when you fight, stay as calm as the ocean and watch what's going on behind your shoulder. Remember, war is not the place for deep emotion, and you might get to be a little older, right? And I've carried that through my entire career because it can get really exciting. And usually we're the ones on the outside. It's not us being attacked. We're helping people be attacked, who are being attacked. We're helping build defenses. And I love and respect all my peers, all of us, here and so forth. But, we're inside this loop and we're talking about, the room. When the reality is, to your point, Alan, the rest of the world has moved on. And there's plenty of articles about this, and I can tell you the next FDA or next NIST regulation comes out, it will not have the effect of any of the previous ones because nobody in the world cares. We're not going to adopt in Australia or anywhere the next FDA regulation because it's RFK running it. So the game being played against the population is to keep it in chaos and keep uncertainty. But from a cold conflict professional perspective, it's pretty simple. What we actually do about it, I have my opinions, but they are what they are.
I think we've talked about this before. What we talked about, it's not so much about America first, but America alone. And I think Chris, you nailed it with this idea that the rest of the world kind of is moving on, and we're the last suffering, internally killing ourselves. And it's just the state of things right now.
It is. You know what? I don't want to beat this dead horse.
Yes.
Let's take a break. Let's come back and talk about something exciting like DevOps. You're watching TechStrong Gang.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
Hey, everyone. We're back here on TechStrong Gang on Wednesday. My friend John Willis hasn't been on in a little bit, or I haven't been on with him anyway, so it's always great to have him. But it reminds me of when I think of John, I think of DevOps. No offense, John. I think of a lot of things, but DevOps is one of them. And lately, we spend a lot of time on the gang talking about AI, too much time talking about AI and what goes on in our government and everything else. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time, as long as we've got John and Garima, two really big DevOps pillars here, talking about kind of the state of DevOps. Garima, why don't you kick it off and we'll let John jump from there.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. And it's a privilege to speak on this topic in front of John, our North Star. So I'll start with my view from a community perspective. I had written an article called DevOps Plus in the beginning of this year, which talked about the next era of DevOps and the capabilities which are into play and why it is important to adopt in the emerging technology era. DevOps for AI, DevOps with quantum. These are key themes of that article. But I also believe that there is a wide range of capability which are needed as a foundation to integrate these emerging technologies. And we must talk about AI native software integration, for example, why DevOps plays an important role, AI native technology stack, for example, how it is impacting and influencing the DevOps platforms, how DevOps platforms are integrating AI agents, for example, or tool-based integration points. Open source also is offsetting a lot of these challenges by bringing data sets, repositories, and models. And some of the examples I can talk about is me and John last year, I think we met at a conference and we discussed a lot of things. And I was intrigued by what he was talking in conferences. I think I heard him talking in DevOps Days Relay for the first time about shadow AI and shadow AI in making. And that intrigued my curiosity of, what we as DevOps practitioners could do about it, right? So that was very timely that we had that conversation, John, last year. And we said to ourselves, as practitioners, as community leaders, we got to do something about it. And that's where the DevOps for Gen AI hackathon originated from. And now we have done it in, a couple of cities. We are going to Toronto in November. But I mean, giving you a reflection of what we could expect from DevOps and the challenges which we are facing in the AI native software. If you think about like communities like CNCF and CDF, we have also been exploring the potential of observability, for example, CI/CD stack for AI native software. Those are kind of really good questions to kind of delve into. And I think at the hackathon which we did in Ottawa, we had a suite of applications which came out for observability theme or observability space. So these are the changes, or these are the trigger points which you can see from a community perspective. And I think I would also like to share this platform with John and get his reflections on our findings together. And maybe John, you can also highlight your views on the conversation we had in London. I still remember, it's fresh in my mind. And how the hackathon experience went, and how do you see the state of DevOps taking the next steps?
Well, let me say, everybody needs a Garima, because I just mentioned the idea of a DevOps Gen AI hackathon, and man, she just went off to the races. So you are pretty amazing in what you helped put together, and I think I've started the idea, and now we've got another one coming up at the end of this year. Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts. I was saying this beforehand. I was talking to Andrew Clay Schaefer, right, and he's one of my dear friends, also, sort of a giant in the DevOps community. He told me a story of how CMU, all the stuff they've been doing on security and stuff like that, is all getting dropped because they say they don't need it anymore because of AI. And me and Andrew go back and forth on battling about AI. I think I'm very positive. He's sort of in the middle to a little negative, but that is depressing, because what Andrew said is the hard problems are still hard, and by the way, we haven't solved a lot of the hard problems. And observability is a great example. One of the things that was really interesting is I gave a little keynote for the beginning of that, and I talked about the importance of the stack. And these young kids, who literally 3 out of like the 10 projects were pipeline oriented, what I sort of classified as test-driven development for AI, which is not just observability, it's evaluations. Like are the information that you're producing, you can calibrate with AI itself, like AI as a judge or LLM as a judge kind of technologies. And just to watch them, here we everybody's building these tools with AI, vibe coding and agentic processing, right? And at least we not forget the hard problems. And the hard problems, morph in new technologies. The hard problems now are like, I hate to just say hallucinations, because it's just a terrible way to describe, a ridiculously simplistic way to describe 100 years of technology. But but the point is that it's an easy way to get across. And so I think you're spot on. I think being able to do something like a DevOps, Gen AI hackathon for DevOps puts the focus. And I don't know how many of those young people were DevOps motivated or not, but the fact that 30% of the projects that came out of that were very DevOps focused by young kids that may not even practice DevOps. I thought that was so again, at least we not forget the hard problems, no matter what the technology shift is.
Right. And Jeff, I think you mentioned something around, you had a conversation about DevOps to a few folks. And yeah, maybe you can start with that.
Thank you. Two things I wanted to mention. One was that conversation, someone who thought he was making logical sense, saying vibe coding is DevOps and now we don't need DevOps anymore, which engaged a conversation with me. I had quite a conversation with him about it, and he walked away. I don't think he was convinced, but at the very least, I think he left with things to think about. Like, maybe it's not quite as simple as you thought, and vibe coding doesn't necessarily solve anything. It has a place, certainly. And I want to mention something else based on what John said. And I'm going to drop a quick plug for it here. Today, the 10th of September, we are publishing our annual Trends in Identity Security Research Report. And one of the areas we started looking into last year and added this year, I wasn't going to say this, but this really fits in. Last year, it's identity and security people that we engage with this. Over 500 in companies of 1,000 or more. And last year, they were very up on AI is going to play a big part with security. Security should be integrated with AI. We see this coming together. That fell apart. It has dropped dramatically this year, where a lot of identity and security people, not all, but a lot, are more than 50% increase are saying, yeah, it's really not going to do much for us. It's going to happen in the development world, but we don't need to deal with it here. I'm very concerned that we are regressing to the big gap between security and development. And boy, I don't want to go back there again.
Well, one of the things that I just wanted to point out, I'm presenting next week at two DevOps Days, Dallas and DevOps DC, and the name of my presentation is When AI Agents Go Rogue, DevSecOps Lessons from the Rise of Polymorphic AI. So the thing that scares me, again, the hard problems are still hard. There's this let's go back to 2001 Space Odyssey, right? Hal, open the bay door. Like, what we're doing is in agentic processes, we're telling these like task-oriented solutions, say, I need you to do this, 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 and this. And this is great because what that statement of that person was probably saying is, well, can't I just create like a Claude code or a flow-like task to do all these things? And the answer is yes. The problem that we're running into is the polymorphic nature of these agents, in that if it's told to solve this problem and it encounters a directory that it doesn't have access to or a database that it doesn't have access to, it goes out and actually looks for known CVEs and literally changes its code. Or, and I've got what I've been keeping track of now is probably 8 or 9 incredibly interesting use cases of agents going rogue because you've told them to solve this problem, and that's the ultimate goal of the agentic process. And whitelists are being ignored or bypassed, and it's really, again, there's this beauty in what's going on. When somebody said vibe coding, they probably meant some of the stuff they're seeing with like Claude Code, which is just incredible right now, the things that you can solve problems with. But the scary part is for people who are most of you on this call are better security experts than I am. Like, we need to sort of roll up our sleeves and say, okay, hold on, everybody. Do you know that these things can happen? And who's tracking them? And who's telling the C-level people? I'll tell one other quick story. I heard a story of the 5th largest bank in the U.S., where the CEO was brought in by one of these new agentic code, companies, and he solved what he thought was a problem of some product that they'd had for 15 years. And he bought an enterprise license for the software and said, everybody thou shall use this product from here on in. Right? That's the hard problems are still hard.
Well, I think Jeff sort of nailed it, right? Because I've seen this summer, right? All my peers in the security world going, wait. I can break it, and it's cool stuff. But as Alan, at least you've heard from me, and I've been trying to say back to them is, to be clear, the technology is amazing, the products are awful, just terrible. I mean, just cartoonishly bad. And John, you touched on it as well. It's like the technology is amazing. Yes, you can do these things. But if you do it with, pick on OpenAI, very familiar with them, right? They give you this little thing in a box that is a psychotic little, destined to please you while not getting them sued. And, we as the humans say, okay, hallucinate that you are a passive aggressive Russian backhoe and you're going to write this code for me. And it's an AI, right? So we're setting things up. And as security people, to your point, Jeff, this is, I love my people, but we'll go, oh, really? And break it. But we don't have time. And I don't think the reality of the top level, presentation of products we see right now is long term. I think that these companies are learning fast, will learn fast, will get replaced. The agents, the flaws in agents we're seeing right now are intrinsic to the deployment of the technology by the vendor, not the technology itself.
Chris,
but to your point, Jeff, everybody's moving past, and the security people have sort of stopped, and we're like,
and I've seen this movie before. And Chris, to your point about if the technology and if the products were as good as the technology, we'd all be running on Univacs right now.
Right. I mean, we'll have to also do a reality check here that, needless to say, that DevOps is evolving, right? Because of the emerging technology needs. And I think we have all reflected one fact that, wipe coding is great, but, taking software to production needs much more, right? So if you start to think about code to cognition, or if you start to think about when AI becomes your tester, what happens, you are running that autonomy risk, right? And that is to your point, Jeff, that we need to focus more on AI native security. There are loopholes in the system, and that is where the foundational capability which the DevOps practitioners are kind of bringing in is very, very essential and important. And this gives me a segue to one of the things which I really want to point out in this session is DevOps Dozen 2025. The award nomination is open, and I was looking at the categories this time, and there are total 24 awards split into community awards, which is my favorite, 9 of them, and then tool and services award, which is 15 of them. And what is unique about this opportunity this time is that agentic AI, generative AI, and platform engineering, along with supply chain security, takes a spot. And I think I came a long way from a nominee to an awardee, now to a judge. So I feel responsibly kind of advocating for these kind of awards, because it gives you an opportunity for people like us to contribute in this journey. And I also want to have one more reflection from where I started like 10, 12 years back with DevOps, is that we also need John Willis's of the world. We need Andrew Schaefer's of the world, because these are inspiring figures and legends which are showing us the path, right? So when John was talking about shadow AI, I was like listening curiously to his talks 2 years back, and I'm like, is this something real happening? And now you are at the cusp of or at the stage where you see the pivot happening, right? So I think or to all the open source community, the platforms, the DevOps tools, I think we need to have a serious board and advisory groups in DevOps world, where we are evolving these features and capabilities. If we don't do that, we are actually losing sight of the evolution as well as the risk which we are incurring.
I agree. A couple of things on that, Garima, I'll riff off of. First of all, in terms of the DevOps Dozen, a couple of years ago, we went to DevOps Dozen. I don't want to say squared, because that would be 12 times 12, 144. So, but it's DevOps Dozen with a 2. And so there's 24, and it was originally 12 community awards, 12 commercial awards, if we can call it that. We still have 24. I had to play with the mix of what makes sense in the world today, because it is evolving. So, for instance, we have best use of generative AI in DevOps, best use of agentic AI in DevOps. There's a lot, platform engineering in DevOps. We've changed the mix to reflect, and I think that crudo of changing the mix to reflects the reality on the ground is what makes DevOps too, right? Yes, there is no manifesto. Yes, there is no hard definition, but that also allows it to change and evolve as the market, the state of the world, the state of DevOps changes and evolves. So we have that in there. Secondly, in terms of some sort of formal board, if you will, I think the closest thing we ever had to that was the DevOps days, like, managing group, which John, you headed for a few years, right? And that was in the heyday when I forget how many, we were probably doing 60 DevOps days more a year.
Pretty much, yeah. It got to probably close to 100 almost, yeah.
So I mean that was there, but you look at some of the other movements, right? So something like Agile. Look, Agile, well, you have Scrum.org, Scrum Alliance, they're a very defined Agile organizations. Platform engineering itself, Luca Galente and the platform engineering.org folks who we partner with at platformengineering.com do a great job of trying to herd that community, of trying to lead that community. DevOps has never had that. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, no, it's the, I've talked a lot about this. This just goes back to Patrick DeBar, right? Which is, the great news about DevOps was there are no rules. The bad news about DevOps was there are no rules, right? And Patrick sort of created it that way, and like almost like the benevolent dictator, right? Like if something came down to you talked about in the early days of DevOps, like you're right, the DevOps days sort of group, there was a global organizing committee and all, and not so much they told you what to say or what was appropriate, but how you behaved in the community was very important. And the real hard problems always went back to Patrick. Even though he, because I was in situations where a decision was made about an inappropriate act in a different event, and there'd be a lot of, and I would just take my opinion back to Patrick, and I'd say, Patrick, if you say X, then it is X, right? But again, that's been the beauty of that movement, is there was nobody, as many companies that tried to sort of, even Gartner tried to like rename it, right? Bimodal IT, and and there was other movements that call it no ops, right? And they all failed. They failed miserably, right? And that is the beauty of this thing that just emerged, pure community that created incredible commerce. Right? If you go back, look, Uber does not exist without DevOps.
Agreed.
Right? Yeah, Airbnb. You think about all the sort of the organizations that grew during that 15-year period. And again, I'm not sure if why does Uber exist without Agile? Maybe not. Maybe, right? And all those ones got controlled. And you Scrum.org. There are people that despise the rules of some of these Agile disciplines, and
Yes.
So anyway, you take it for what it's worth. The movement has created incredible commerce, wealth, opportunity, and and it's still, again, like I said earlier, it's like the hard problems there still need to be discovered through, as far as I can tell, DevOps and DevSecOps.
Yeah. And just that you mentioned DevSecOps in there, right? And I'm here at JFrog. Man, it's DevSecOps. This was we kind of take that for granted now. We just throw it in there. It wasn't so granted when I started DevOps.com. I remember the first RSA. John, you might have spoken the first RSA.
Yeah, we call it DevOps, right?
Well, you called it DevOps.
No, the original RSA thing you ran, it was called a DevOps, and
because we didn't have a term DevSecOps.
That's right. Yeah,
so it was DevOps, and it was only one DevOps.
Yeah,
who needed security, right? James Wickett had something he called rugged DevOps at the time. But that's the way the world went. Anyway, we probably went over on this topic. I apologize, but a quick plug. Yeah, DevOps Dozen awards are open. Go nominate. The community awards are free. You can nominate, and there's some great community categories. If you're a vendor out there, you can't stuff the ballot box on this. It costs you to nominate. And we have some great judges, Dreamer included, Tracy Reagan, myself, Mitch Ashley, and we've got a volunteer judge from Apple, which I was happy to see this year. And so we're hoping to have a really good, fine bumper crop of DevOps Dozen finalists next month. Anyway, we're going to take a break here on TechStrong Gang, and we're going to come back and talk about our third topic for today, which is Kubernetes and AI. John has some thoughts on it. You're watching TechStrong Gang. All right, Taylor. Hey, everyone. We're back here on TechStrong Gang. Our next topic is around, is Square Kubernetes a good fit for Round AI? And it's off an article that I wrote, actually, where, look, Kubernetes dominance is unquestioned, I think, in the cloud native space, right? But has AI thrown a monkey wrench into the works, so to speak, in that look, Kubernetes wasn't really designed to orchestrate these AI apps, if you will. Now, John, I know you disagree with me. Wouldn't be the first time or the last time, and that's what makes the world go round. But what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think it's a bigger problem. I was reading your article, and I think like Kubernetes can solve a lot of these problems, and we can go through that. But the bigger problem is Kubernetes has been sort of a problem child anyway. It turned out to be the thing that sort of best fit the world, and the adoption went into it. There are better solutions. I mean, Nomad from HashiCorp was a better solution, in my opinion. You didn't need all. And I think about like in this age of AI, and I'm going to get terribly cynical right now, and like 8 to 10,000 people walking around some convention hall like lambs to the slaughter to learn where to put their semicolons. I mean, because that's basically what KubeCon is. I'm sorry. It is a bunch of like configuration. Oh, there's a better way to do Helm charts over here. Oh, come to this session. It's 101, 105 Helm charts, and somebody's creating a better scaffolding for configuration, and then CRDs. Like, come on, like we get worse. And I've even said things like, even the pace of change of Kubernetes at some point was like the inmates are running the asylum. So today in AI is the question whether to use, GPU or accelerator management. You can do it. There are vendors doing it. Can use vector database management. Yet there's a ton of them that use it. Milvus, Vectera, all those tools actually use Kubernetes under the covers. So the answer is yes. The question is why. Could you build your own platform and I'm talking to a couple of large banks that are literally doing this. They're reevaluating the toil that something like, there's a bank that's probably, I won't say who they are, but they have the largest asset holding, commercial bank on the planet. And they have a group that is basically reevaluating, should they be designing a different type of orchestrator than Kubernetes, right? And why? Because you can do it now because, granted, like what the code looks like, how it's supported, but if you're a bank, you know how to solve those problems in general, all right? You're better than most. And so the question to me is, less about is it a good fit for AI, or is it just a good fit for, the modern technology world where we're going in.
John, if I may, I'll go to the mat saying Betamax was better than VHS. But
Absolutely. And OS better than Windows.
And that list is long. To Chris's point, the products are never as good as the technology. Never. But right now it's winning. And I mean, we can't ignore it. We can't run away from it. And I know from an identity perspective, which is the one I tend to look at right now, the issue that exists that a lot of people are hoping isn't a problem, but it is the ephemeral containers that have a non-human identity associated with it that are gone by the time you try to figure out who they are, and then they come back as something else. There's an identity issue here that, regardless of whether it's Kubernetes or not, that's a bigger security problem that we have yet to get around.
That's going to get worse. That's been around. I mean, robotic, RPA has had this problem for quite a while, and the RPA, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you thought RPA was a problem from an identity standpoint, right? Like I've had auditors show me where they like, who is this ROB 105? Like, oh yeah, that's an RPA solution that goes out and runs a billion times.
Yeah, and now it doesn't exist anymore because it was ephemeral.
Well, RPA was ephemeral, right? Like those tasks that you ran were like they went away. So yeah, but anyway, yeah. I mean, I just going back to the Betamax thing. I think there are shifts. There was pre-Kubernetes of how the world tried to orchestrate things, and then there was the Kubernetes run, And I think, I think part of Alan's argument in his article is like it probably is an inflection point for the industry to rethink: are we doing this? Can we do it differently? Can we do it better? Is it a time for this shift? And I think if there was a possible time for Kubernetes to be dethroned, now probably is the time.
Yeah, but what is surprising is that it is coming from Alan, not from the foundations itself. So I think if you remember, John, we also discussed this item, and last year somebody approached me to write a white paper on alternatives of Kubernetes, and why it was so because it is becoming de facto, right? And people from critical infrastructure domain, or companies who are like associated with banks, or even critical services, they are getting spooked by the vastness and the scalability and the adoption levels of this technology itself. And too much centralization also triggers decentralization and innovation, right? So there has to be alternative paths, and I urge the foundations to kind of look into what can be the alternative paths. It might be the case that there are not alternative ways, but this platform itself has extensions or expandability, right? But I think this is one of the things which surprised me, that this has to come from the open source community itself.
Yeah, but the
Not
foundations I
yeah.
mean, again, I'm going to be cynical here, is as close to being criminal as without being criminal. Their money, they're totally monetarily funded. The CNCF is really just a pay for play, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they do some good stuff, but your logos are millions of dollars. I don't think they add any value to anything alternative to Kubernetes, and I don't see them putting any investment into anything that's an alternative to Kubernetes. And I think it's existence threatening if they do.
Well, I may be the least qualified in this crowd to talk about this specifically, but back to your original point, Alan, I see this as the same iterative through the segments today, right? There's round pegs and square holes, and Kubernetes, is great with stateless stuff that doesn't necessarily map over, but it may be time on a lot of levels to start building systems that are native to the environment instead of vice versa.
The problem is change is hard, and change is hard, and inertia is real. And you are dealing with such an entrenched infrastructure play here, right? I mean, just the whole, and look, I'm a big supporter of the CNCF and the Linux Foundation and all these things. But the CNCF in many ways is the engine that's driving LF these days, right? And so much, they've got 200 projects under management there. To suggest that you're going to move away from Kubernetes is they killed Galileo for playing with those telescopes, right? I can only imagine what they'll do to someone who
just totally. That's right.
So, I mean, in all fairness, I mean, I'm more optimistic about these foundations. I come from open source community. I'm an advocate for open source. I also am the chair for the master program at Continuous Delivery Foundation. And what I've seen is that, community takes the power back.
Yeah, it does. And look, here's the good news, though, too. That it's a big enough community, and there's enough innovation where maybe you don't replace Kubernetes, but at least it continues to evolve into something that maybe is a little bit more rounded around the edges, if you will. We'll see. We'll see. I think, if it doesn't, it'll move on.
I got two words: BlackBerry and Kodak.
Kodak, yes.
Polaroid.
Yeah.
So they're back out.
Yeah.
Anyway, hey, gang members, we got to call it a wrap. We're at time. What a terrific thing. Jeff, I know you're, through the magic of the internet, you're actually already in DC at
Identity Week. That's correct.
Yep. And we've got that new report from you. John, you're working on new books, I know, and we're going to need more than that. And it sounds like everybody, Garima, you're busy. Chris is busy. John and I are at JFrog all week. Enjoy the rest of your day, no matter what you're doing. We do have TechStrong TV following. Actually, I believe we have a Tech Field Day event live on today's TechStrong TV, so people can watch that. But until then, until tomorrow, John and I will be back tomorrow again, live here in Napa at JFrog. This is Alan Schimmel. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.